So good evening, everyone. I, Prachi Tripathi, pleased to welcome you all on the behalf of Izhar Debating Society, Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia. Izhar, as the word itself means to express, was created in the Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia, with the aim to develop a debating culture among the law students. As we all know that debating is the mother of advocacy, so the objective is to create a platform which envisions to enhance the articulation of arguments, argumentative skills, and critical analysis. In all walks of life, debating and deliberations play a crucial role. So today we are here with a very interesting and unfortunately one of the most unexplored areas of debating, the parliamentary debate. Parliamentary debate is extemporaneous debating on the topics that change from debate to debate. It improves everyone's speaking skills and enables them to instantly discuss on important issues. It enhances a person's intellect and increases his or her arena of knowledge. A student is supposed to think of innovative ideas in the field of science, religions, politics, media, or whatever the topic may be. Parliamentary debate is not like other debates. It is unique in its style and requires training to master the skill of this art. So today we have with us a very special guest, Ms. Karishma Kharbanda ma'am, to grace the occasion with her remarkable experience and expertise. I welcome you, Karishma ma'am, on the behalf of the Izhar Debating Society, and we are extremely thankful to you for giving us your invaluable time. Though it is difficult to discuss ma'am's achievement in such a short span of time, but I would like to take the privilege to mention some of them. Ma'am has completed her graduation from University of Lucknow. She has studied mass communication in Viacom 18 Media Private Limited. Ma'am has at AJK MCRC Jamia Millia Islamia. Ma'am has been actively involved in profound deliberations on matters of international concern in the form of conventional debates and youth forums, and has won several accolades across India for her endeavors. Ma'am, it is a great honor and extreme privilege for the Izhar Debating Society that you took out time from your busy schedule and is here to help us in deciphering the art of parliamentary debate. So before starting the session, I do have an important announcement for the participants. So we will be circulating an attendance form at the end of our session. So please fill the form in order to have the participation certificate. Let's get started. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. First of all, there is nothing like I have like an extraordinary amount of achievement. It's absolutely not the case. All right. I like to keep my sessions very, very interactive, and I like to keep my sessions, in terms of all of you. I've always felt that even when I'm training younger students or I'm training somebody who's, done the master's or is pursuing a graduation, I feel the most important thing is participation and how much you take away from the whole narrative. So if you're all here and you're going to listen to me talk about certain things for 1 hour, I would also want you to, participate and tell me at different points of time, how are you grasping things? And, what do you think about the issues and all of those things? So, talking about how do you go about doing a parliamentary debate? First of all, I would just like to give you a brief as to how it all started for me and how I got into public speaking first. And then, I moved into doing conventional debates, and then I moved into doing model UNs, and then I went on to do parliamentary debates. And how one medium for debate has led me to, make a clearer understanding or have a clearer understanding on how to frame a logic or how to, go about just approaching a very simple aspect of debate or a very simple topic or even a very complicated topic. The most important thing is to understand how you're going to present an idea. And for that, I will tell you as to how I got into the whole picture, first of all, and then how, how my journey has basically been. So for me, I got into public speaking I remember when I was in 3rd grade, I was in an all-girls school back in Guwahati, and I was supposed to give an opening address, which I massively messed up. And I still remember my legs were shivering. It was all very it's very filmy. It's very, interesting. And, when I think about it at this point of time, I always feel that, if that day I had gone on and I had given an immaculate performance, maybe I would not have worked on myself so much. And that's what I really feel, that during your journey, there will be screw ups. During your journey, there will be times when you that where you will falter, where you have prepared your arguments in an airtight manner, but it won't translate to something. Can you all hear me? Am I not audible?
You're audible.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right. In case I'm not, so one of you could just unmute yourself and like just let me know. All right. Because with this whole online thing, like you never really know. Sometimes I just feel I'm blabbering to myself and the other person cannot really get it. All right. So talking about the whole journey per se, I think during your journey, there will always be times when, you've done a couple of debates, you've done really well. And, at some point you'll hit a blockade, or you'll have an airtight argument that you have thought key, you'll go on stage and this is how you're going to perform, and it won't turn out to be that way. So the most important thing that I have learned from my journey, and that I will always teach you, and that's something I always begin with whenever I'm taking any session, whether it's for a conventional debate or whether it's for an MUN or whether it's today I'm doing a parliamentary session, is that there will be screw ups along the way. So, embrace that, because at the end of the day, public speaking, whenever you go out to do that in any which way whatsoever, it's about rediscovering yourself and, understanding how you understand a topic and how you're able to present your idea in front of somebody. I think that's the most important thing. And for me, the day I feel that it's not happening for me anymore, I am not able to, learn something from the experience on my own, I think that will be the day when I will just stop doing it. Right. So, and I've been doing this since class 3rd, and that's not happened till this day and age. So I think that is how you approach something as creative and as passionate as public speaking. And if you look at public speaking through that perspective, I think you will also, give more time to it. You will also think of it not as an exercise that you have to do because it's a session that you're supposed to, it's a mandatory session to attend, or it's something in your curriculum, but you will acknowledge it as something that affects your personality on a very holistic level. Now, why am I saying that, right? And I know I will get on the parliamentary debates in the next 10 minutes or in the next 5 minutes maybe, but really understand why am I talking about this. So at the end of the day, all of these are, simulation based exercises, be it a conventional debate, be it a model UN, or be it a parliamentary debate, wherein if you're in the government side, you will assume a responsibility and you will either be a prime minister, or you'll start the debate, or you'll be a whip. But at the end of the day, it's all a simulation that you will get to speak for a certain amount of stipulated time. You will go on stage, you will deliver your argument, and you will come back. But it's not just about that. Once you come back and once you go out in the real world, today, most of you are studying law, right? Some of you will go on to become judges. Some of you will go on to, so some of you will go on, or if the rest of you could just unmute yourself so that, there is no cross, narrative going on, because sometimes it just gets a little disturbing. Yeah. All right. Thank you. So, some of you will go on to be judges. Some of you will go on to, litigate. Some of you will go into the corporate world. Some of you might just try and, do something completely different, but go into public policy, because when you do something as interesting as law, I think there are so many options that you can always take up, right? But one thing that will always be there is how you present your idea, because that is in essentiality is the crux of human communication. So I'm somebody, I was a CA student at one point of time. I chose to drop out because I wanted to pursue mass communication. I came to Jamia to pursue my mass communication. I got placed on campus, and right now I'm working with Youth Select. And, my team, we make promos. But at the end of the day, even if I'm doing something very technical, there are jamming sessions wherein I have to, pitch my ideas, or I have to, explain a concept to them. And, if I will falter in my communication, irrespective of how lucrative my idea is, or how innovative my idea is, or how, easy yet catchy and what entertaining my idea is, if my presentation falters, I will never be able to communicate it to the person listening to my idea. So my idea getting greenlit will never happen. So all of you at this point of time, understand this, that this session or the sessions that you've been taking on earlier, or the sessions you will take later on, or in any form of communication, whether you're doing a moot court tomorrow, or whether you're doing, or you're just in a seminar discussing your ideas, or you're presenting an academic paper which you might choose to write at some point of time in the future. It is all about explaining what you have thought, or what you've written, or what you believe in. And at the end of the day, that is what a debate is all about. So the first and the most important thing that you do when you're doing a parliamentary debate, and now I'll go on to it. When you're doing a parliamentary debate, there is a topic that you will have, right? Now, I will not give you a very essential detail as to what are the rules and regulations, because I'm sure you can just Google them and you can find them on the internet. But what I'm going to talk is the psyche through which you approach a parliamentary debate. And at the same time, I'll also tell you that, something like this can be extremely subjective. So in case you do have something, you have a query at the, during the debate or during my discussion, you want to ask a question, you can just drop in a chat on the message, and, we're going to keep it very informal that way. So at the end of the day, whenever you have a topic for a parliamentary debate, say you're debating the value ABC, right? Now, ABC is a concept, and you're talking about whether the concept of ABC has been effective in terms of economic impact in your country, right? Now, if you're against the government or you're for the motion, first of all, you have to be extremely clear as to what the idea is trying to propagate. So for instance, if I am an individual and I'm against the motion, I have to be extremely clear of the fact that all my points are going to, negate the motion in itself. And for the purpose of which, for instance, say tomorrow I'm in a debate wherein the topic is something with regard to democracy, something which I as an individual completely believe in, right? But if I have been given the podium with regard to being against the motion, at that point of time, I have to approach it from the perspective of being against the motion. At that point of time, I cannot let my individual, feelings or my individual prejudice or my individual bias, or even something which I really believe in or something that I feel is very rational at this point of time, to take control of me. Because being a public speaker or being a debater, the basic aspect is when you go on stage, you have to think in a way which challenges your own notions. And, debate at the end of the day, all these exercises that you're doing is to make you a better thinker, a better analyzer, and a better communicator, right? So the first and the most important thing is when you are given a topic, how are you approaching the topic, right? You at some points have to remove your individual bias or what you believe in, and you have to think objectively. So for instance, if I've been given something as pristine as, the ideals of democracy in this day and age, and I have to go against the motion, right? So, and honestly, for people who know me or for people who do not know me, I am somebody who absolutely believes in the ideals of democracy. But if I am given this aspect and I have to go against and I have to talk against democracy, there are so many narratives through which I can, establish the fact that there are so many democratic countries out there who, in the name of democracy, will infringe on the territorial integrity of other countries. For instance, Middle East is one narrative, right? I can also talk about how countries like the People's Republic of China, who believe in territorial sovereignty, will never infringe on, say, a Palestinian crisis, right? They will, give resources to rehabilitate the people in their own territory, but they will never infringe on the territorial integrity. And that is what their country's perspective is. So in the garb of democracy, there are a lot of nations which will go on to propagate human rights violations, right? Now, this is one way to analyze the situation and to understand as to how you can undermine something as pristine as democracy, right? I hope you're all getting my point. So at the end of the day, the first and the most important thing when you're in a debate or when you're doing a parliamentary debate is when you get the topic, take 2 minutes to yourself. Okay? There is no hurry. Take 2 minutes to yourself. Think about how you have to approach the topic at hand. What are going to be the 3 to 4 major points that you're going to be talking about, right? And how are you going to work together as a team, right, to propagate that idea itself? Now, again, understand, when you're doing a parliamentary debate, you're not an individual, right? You're not contending for an individual award. I know there are individual awards as well, right? But in a team effort, there is no individuality, right? When you're doing a conventional debate, for instance, or when you're doing a model UN, and if you're an individual delegate, at that point of time, you're contesting for your own self, right? You can go on the stage and you can talk about your topic. You can talk about what your country believes in, for instance, if you're doing an MUN. And you can walk away thinking that, what, I did a great job. And, I might win, I might not win. That's a different perspective altogether. But I did what I could do best, right? And as a debater and as a communicator in that format, I think you did a good job if you have reached that level. But in a parliamentary debate, there is nothing like an individual. what you do is you do as a team. So either you will, like have this amazing narrative wherein you will talk about certain things and you will go on to establish your point, or as a team, you will sync and you will not be on the same page. The most important thing is, for a parliamentary debate, if you're entering into one, you cannot enter into it with an individual thought process thinking, what, maybe I don't get along with the other two people, or I don't like the other two people, and I just have to go there and I just have to talk what I believe in and do my best. That honestly doesn't happen. So when you're doing a PD, your team is your strength and your team can also be your weakness. It depends on your perspective as to how you work together as a team to, put forth your point. There have been so many PDs that I've been a part of. There have been so many PDs that I've also, like just sat and heard and realized. And I've understood that, sometimes the three speakers, in their individual capacities are just, they have an average point of view. But because all the team members are on the same page, they go on to establish a very thought-provoking narrative. So the first and the most important thing, what happens is, now I will talk in sequence, right? You get a topic. As an individual, you take 2 minutes to yourself and think about what can my contribution be and how is that topic, how am I going to analyze the topic? So when you take those 2 to 3 minutes of yourself, you can have a plan of action as to what are you going to, talk up to your fellow team members, and, how can you help them and how you can help each other. The next is, if for instance, you get half an hour of prep time, the next 15, at least 10 to 15 minutes, you need to be on a call, or if you're doing a PD together, which is in the same physical space, which, honestly, at this point of time is such a boon to happen. However, if that's not happening, get together on a call and talk about how you can all, work on this one thought process and how you can all add your points at that point of time. So for instance, if you are 3 people, right, in a parliamentary debate, if, for instance, even if you're in the opposition or in the government, you will be divided into 3, there'll be 3 roles for each of you, right? There'll be a person who will open the debate. There'll be somebody who's the prime minister who will go next. And then there will be the whip who will conclude the proceedings and all of those things. All the 3 people have their own roles. For instance, the person who will go first will explain what the topic talks about, will, try to explain, for instance, if the topic of your debate is something with regard to democracy, you will establish that, as a team, what is the definition of democracy that you are adhering to, and you will establish that. And then the first person will, give 2 to 3, salient points as to what you believe in the narrative. For instance, if the topic is the democracy as an institution has brought down the world order, right? If I am a speaker who's going first, right, and I am the government, and I believe that, it actually has brought down the world order, I will go and talk about, in the first 2 minutes of my speech, I will talk about what democracy entails. I will talk about what is going to be our definition for democracy. I'm going to talk about how did democracy come into the picture and where it has led us to at this point of time. Then I will, in the next few minutes of my speech, post the 2 minutes, I will go on to talk about how, as a team, we believe that democracy has taken, has had a major abject and has led to human rights violation on a massive scale. So what I will do is I will establish one thought process, all right, from the government side. I will establish one thought process, and then I will build onto that argument, right? So for instance, if I go on to say that, in the Middle East, it has led to human rights violations. It has led to massive financial inconsistencies in respect to their economies. If I will go on and talk about how, it has... Because, yeah, okay. If I go and talk about how, at the end of the day, it has led to children being uprooted from schools and has placed them into war territories, wherein the whole narrative of child soldiers are becoming a reality. If I'm talking about how it has led to, war crimes against females, specifically women and girls, how it has affected the LGBT communities living in the conflict areas, how it has toppled governments, right? I have to take into, for instance, I have to take a case study. So for example, if I'm talking about the Middle East in specificity, and I choose Syria, I will talk about how the government of, say, the governments of Europe started. First, they invaded Iraq, then they went on to invade Syria, and what happened, how the government was brought down, how, in the garb of spreading the ideals of peace, prosperity, and democracy, the government was toppled down, the government was challenged, which was, in with respect to their government and with respect to the people there, it was a constitutionally elected government, which, lost all precedence, and how the law of the land was compromised, which led to a lot of people being displaced, which led to people leaving their homes in the middle of the nights and, going to other territories, which led to human displacement, which went on in millions, right? So at the end of the day, my idea has to talk about one case study I can pick up and I can build on that idea. So my logic is going to be how in the garb of democracy, how democracy in essentiality, when it emerged as a narrative, it had really beautiful ideals. When the United Nations was consolidated post World War II, it had its spirit in the right place. But how, because the UNSC at this point of time has P5 nations, which is dominated by a few countries at the end of the day, and other countries are not being given, permanent membership of the UNSC, and there have been a bunch of countries asking for it for the past few decades, right? How that has led to a consolidation and a monopolization of power, so much so that hierarchies of power have established in Europe, because of which democratic ideals have been compromised, right? This is going to be my point, which I'm going to prove by taking the example of Syria, which I'm going to prove by taking the example of Nigeria, which I'm going to also prove by taking the example of, how people who've been trying to enter borders in the middle of the nights, escaping through, really unsafe territories, have, died on the way. And I can talk about Alan Kurdish and how, that one photo of that child rocked the entire world, and how, it impacted all of us in such a severe manner, which not only questioned what was going on in the Middle East and how could the United Nations allow it to happen, it also questioned how, safe the ideals of democracy were, right? So this is going to be my approach if I'm the government, right? I'm the first speaker. I go on to explain what democracy means. I go on to explain how democratic values in its essence had the right spirit, but now how it had taken a wrong turn. And then I will go on to give you examples proving why my point is correct at this point of time, right? That will be the first person who goes in. Then there will be the person who will come from the opposition. So for instance, now if there is somebody who's in the opposition, right, what is going to be their modus operandi? It's going to be very simple. The first thing is that their narrative is going to negate what the first speaker said. So they're going to, either disagree with the essence of what, when I was, say for instance, A was the first speaker. So the person B who goes in next, who's the first speaker from the team opposition, will go on to talk about how either they agree with the definition of democracy or they will come up with their own definition of democracy. And because again, as democratic narratives are very subjective. For instance, however, right, and here pay extreme attention. For instance, tomorrow, if you're doing something which talks about, say, domestic violence from the Indian perspective, now that has been outlined and clearly defined in various aspects of the law itself, right, which has like an airtight definition. So for instance, if something has an airtight definition, then do not make the mistake, because again, it's going to be a very impractical mistake to make, that you go and you negate the whole definition it had. However, if it's something like nationality, or if it's something like secularism, right, which are subjective narratives, that is a definition that you can also contest. Also, if you notice that the first person in the government, that is Speaker A, if Speaker A has not given you a definition, then go on to say that, we've had this debate without even, outlining what the essentialities of democracy means at this point of time today. So as the first speaker in the opposition, first of all, your main modus operandi is to very, very, immaculately listen to what the other person is saying, what the first speaker said, then negate what the other person said, or highlight the points that the first person missed. So the most essential part is, wherever we're talking about an ideal, if the person in the other team has not given you a definition, highlight how they have failed to give you a definition, which is their role, which is their responsibility, being in the government side. And if they haven't given you a definition, be prepared with your own definition, right? Then you give them a definition, then you bring in your own points. For instance, in the next 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, you bring in your point as to how democracy is, it began with the right thought process, and it has gone on to instill the thought processes in a very, very, abject phase. And it has, led to peace and prosperity in an otherwise really, really screwed up narrative. For instance, right? Now, if you are going to talk about how democracy at this point of time is one of the most beautiful things, you first talk about how debate in itself is a very, very valued part of democracy. You will go on and talk about how when the Second World War was going on, any person who defied Nazis in Germany itself, they were either beheaded or they were imprisoned. So there was no freedom of speech and expression. So, that becomes the most powerful weapon that you have, right? When you're in a debate wherein you're hearing what the other person has to speak, and you're hearing them, you're giving them that kind of dignity and respect to put their point forward. And even if you're disagreeing with them, you're doing that in a very cordial, in a very respectful manner. That in itself is one of the most important narratives of democracy. So talk about that. Talk about how freedom of speech and expression is one of the most essential parts of democracy. And that is what has led to facilitation of this debate in the very first place. Right? First of all. Second, you can always go and talk about how democratic ideals have led to peace and prosperity. You can talk about how, the countries of Russia or the country of PRC, how it does not allow freedom of speech and expression. How when a few group of people protested at the Tiananmen Square in China, even if it was just hundreds of people standing out on the streets in a very peaceful protest, how, tanks were out, and there is a very, very prominent picture. And, read more and more so that, you can bring in narratives and you can establish imagery in front of, the people that you're talking about, and talk about how, there is this one image of this unnamed man who's standing in front of a tank, which, showcases that irrespective of how powerful a government can be, protest is a very, very important part of a citizen's life, and the discharge of rights and the discharge of responsibilities can only happen when a person has the right to, express their opinion. And how democracy is a huge enabler of, freedom of thought and freedom of expression and speech at the end of the day. So talk about that. And then in your last minute, or in the last, say, 675 seconds, try and negate whatever ideals and whatever points the first person in the government side has talked about. For instance, if I am a speaker and I talked about how in Syria it has led to displacement of people, how it has led to, major human rights atrocities, carried on by the forces, say the troops which were sanctioned by the UNSC. So even the peacekeeping forces have been, helmed of causing human rights atrocities, or how the US troops have invaded and they've, led to human rights violations. Talk about how, the government of Syria itself ended up bombing its own people. Talk about how there have been multiple Reuters reports wherein the troops of the land itself, they have, entered the people's houses, and, they've wrecked their houses, and they've, capsized their properties, and they've taken children as prisoners, they've taken women as prisoners, right? So at the end of the day, talk about how the government in itself was propagating human rights violation. And if no consolidated step was taken by the international community, the situation would be worse off at this point of time. So negate whatever the first speaker in the government side has said. So if you're going in the opposition, first of all, you have to listen very carefully. Second, you have to establish not only your own point, but also negate what the first person said. Now, if you are, so that establishes the first person goes from the government side, the first person comes from the opposition side. Now, it's the second person who's going in from the government side, right? Now, at this point of time, if I am a person who is the prime minister, and I have to go and I have to talk about how, democracy has, led to huge destruction of human capital, right? Somebody from my team has already given 2 points, has already talked about a case study of Syria. There has been another person who's come and who's tried to, decentralize my point, who's already tried to come and, take a jab at what the first speaker in my team said. So my first and my foremost responsibility is to do a bit of damage control if any has happened. right? So if there has been a bit of damage control as the second person going in from the government side, my modus operandi at that point of time is going to be that I am going to first take charge of the situation. I'm going to talk about how, the opposition is trying to, dissuade the public by, bringing in rhetorical narratives, by talking about how this happened in Nazi Germany and that happened in Nazi Germany. And, like how you can talk about, at the end of the day, talk about the present scenario and bring the audience back to the present, because that is the case study that you're talking about. Remember, your team started by saying that democratic ideals in its heart were effective, right? But how they have destabilized the government in different parts of Middle East in the current scenario. So your entire narrative is based in the present, right? Bring the people back to the present. Bring the adjudicators who are listening to your speeches, or the people who are like, if it's happening in like an auditorium, bring the people back to the present, because your debate and your logic lies in the present, not talking about the past, right? You just mention a bit of the past, you reminisce the past for like a few seconds, but your debate is happening in the present. So bring them back in the present. Talk about what's happening in Syria today. Talk about, like the daily struggles of the people. Talk about how this destabilization process has been going on for nearly a decade now. And, there is no, vision for how it's going to be resolved. Talk about how many, closed room negotiations have happened. So many human rights commission seminars have happened. Talk about how so many times there have been sessions on record in the UNSC talking about Syria, and nothing has yielded to a very positive impact, right? Talk about how in the name of democracy, even today, there is, an expansion of the constitutionally elected government's rights, and how people are being infringed upon, and how people's homes are being bombed by external forces, right? So at the end of the day, bring them back to the present. Tell them how democracy is used as a fleeting example of something which used to be beautiful at a point of time. But at this point of time, it's just another mechanism for taking hold and establishing your hegemony on the world itself, right? Or how a certain government in a certain geographical location in the world is trying to take away your resources, or take control of your resources, and just, not care for the people. Talk about how the government, irrespective of the fact whether if it's a military-backed government, or if it's a dictatorship-backed government, or even at the end of the day, it's a provincial government elected by the people at that point of time, how it cares for its own people, because the government constitutes of people who belong to that area or who belong to that community, and how people from external forces who have no understanding of the legacy, who have no understanding of the culture, will come and just take away your resources in like the spark of a moment, just because they can. And just because there's an international organization that talks about your rights, but does not end up providing them to you when it actually comes down to that, right? Talk about how the UN peacekeeping forces have, come and condemned huge brutalities on the women in your country, right? Talk about how the women in your country have been pushed to the brink, so much so that, a lot of them, while traveling, have ended up dying because of lack of basic resources, lack of water, lack of food, right? So at the end of the day, try to evoke an empathy and try to evoke some kind of very genuine emotion for the plight of the people, right? And what's happening with them in the present. And I am repeating the narrative of present because that's where your debate lies. A lot of times, what happens is you get so swayed away by what the first speaker in the opposition has said, that you forget where your debate lies. And that is one of the most important, narratives that you have to hold on to, because at the end of the day, you have to believe in what you're talking about, right? So, don't let the first speaker in the opposition overwhelm you completely. Because if I'm in the opposition, and if I am, fighting against the government in a debate, that is going to be my agenda, that I will go and I will deliver my speech in such a strong manner, in such a forthcoming manner, that my narrative will be to just overwhelm them completely, so that the next person who just comes, just after me will, not be able to understand what just happened, or, I will just, catch him or her unawares in such a way that they will not be able to concentrate on what their topic was. So remember the core of your debate. That's the most important point. And at the end of the day, you will always, find a lot of speakers in a parliamentary debate who will, talk with a lot of passion and talk with a lot of, enthusiasm. There is no problem in doing that. If you are a speaker who believes in that, if you're a speaker who talks with that perspective, that's absolutely your style, and own your style, right? Never let somebody come and tell you, like, this style doesn't work. Because again, style is a very, very subjective thing. The most important thing is you have to understand that even if you're a passionate debater, your mind should be completely calm. And that is something which comes with experience. So when I started debating, when I was back in class third, I mean, my legs were shivering. I could not process what was happening. As I got, older and I got better with debating, that's something I realized that, if I am, say, being a China in a model UN conference, I have to be very, very, forceful, and I have to be very passionate when I'm talking about mother, and I'm talking about my country, and I'm talking about my, cultural heritage. But my mind has to be calm, because I know what I have to talk about, and I know what I have to, what my end game is in this debate or in this simulation. In the same way, if, say, I am a UK in a country, in a committee, where I'm talking about, say, the European Union and why, the revocation of a certain article led me to leave the EU. And it was because at the end of the day, that's what my country and the people talked about, right? At the end of the day. So my composure has to be very calm. And in that calm composure, I have to have this crystal clear idea as to what my end game is. In the same way, when you're doing a parliamentary debate, if you're on the side of the government and you start a debate, again, your style has to be a little subjective. You have to, tweak or make small certain tweaks as to what and how you're going to present your topic. So even if you're being very, very passionate, make sure that you're very clear, that you've had enough water, that, people can make out what you're trying to say, or, they can at least understand what you're saying. Because, I'm sure most of you must have done parliamentary debates, and sometimes, you just hear a debater who comes and who will just, say something in like a flurry of emotions, but you will not be able to understand what they said, because of course, you just have 7 minutes to say. And, I, for instance, know 7 minutes are never enough. For me as a speaker, 7 minutes have never been enough. But at the same point, don't try to fit in so many points that your 7 minutes ki speech mein se, I can just understand, say, a 2 minute worth of content. That doesn't work out, right? So make sure that even if you're giving me 5 points instead of a 7 point, you give those 5 points to me in such a beautiful and in such a impactful manner that, those 5 points are enough for me to ponder upon, right? So if you are the second speaker from the government side, who's basically the third speaker overall, and as 2 people have already gone before you, your first narrative is to, not get caught in what the first speaker in the opposition said. Second, carry forward your point and, bring the adjudicators, bring the audience back to what your perspective or your team's perspective of the debate is. So for instance, if we've taken a topic, say, on democracy, I will bring it, and if I am the second speaker in the government side, I will bring the audience and the adjudicators back to the present. And these are the points that I'm going to talk about, right? Then it is smarter for me not to bring forth a lot of new points. So for instance, if my team has done its revision clearly, and, in a very smart manner, if we've utilized the 15 minutes of the starting preparation time, as I talked about earlier, and we know key, these are the 5 points the first speaker will say, and I will just build up to those points if I'm the second speaker. And while the first speaker was speaking, the time got elapsed and the first speaker could only talk about 4 points, and there is 1 point remaining. So, towards the end of that speech, I can add that 1 point, right? But that is something that I'll be only able to do if I had heard my team member talking about their first 5 points when we were having that con call together, or when we were discussing sitting in front of each other together. So this brings me back to how important teamwork is, right? So again, do not undermine the value of teamwork. There are certain topics and there are certain points which I know, I'm emphasizing on it one after another. One is going to be bring them back to the present. Second is going to be how important teamwork is, because in the flow of a parliamentary debate, the passions are always running so high that, we sometimes just forget it. We do not take We do not think it's, it's really important. We think like it's all right if, I did not sit with my team members for 15 minutes. I had to work on my speech, which was more important. And, like individually, all of you might end up thinking that, but that never helps. Trust me, in the long run, that will not help. So if you want to have a good experience of doing a parliamentary debate together, teamwork is the most important thing. So do not compromise on that, right? So in case if the first person who went from your side forgot to elucidate a point or mentioned a point but could not explain that in detail, make sure that you end up doing that in the most effective manner possible, right? Then just give me one moment, right? Yeah, okay. Then you have the second person going to the opposition side. So for instance, which is now the fourth speaker. And this is something that I mean, it's a very individual thing as to how I perceive it. You might find people who do parliamentary debates who might say, like, is the second speaker from this and the second speaker from that. But if, at the end of the day, always understand what is your target audience, right? With the audience, with the adjudicators, it's the fourth speaker who's doing. And I will tell you how target audience is a very, very important narrative. Because this is something that I've realized since I've started working with Wood Select also. Because whatever content you make, right? It can be a debate, it can be a film, it can be a promo, which is just for 30 seconds. It can be a copyright that you do, which is like, it can be an ad line. It can be something as simple, which Tata Sky said, ki isko laga dala to live jingle lala. It's just one line. But you have to know what your target audience is. You have to know what your adjudicators are, and you have to understand that for them it's the fourth speaker, and you are going to go fourth. And I think that psychology really reflects, because there have been three speakers and they've heard three speakers already on one topic, right? And if you're going on the fourth space, you have to, it's not like you have to add a plethora of points. You just have to explain your point in your side very, very effectively. But you have to bring down the narrative that the Prime Minister of the government said. And I think that's the most important thing. So as the fourth speaker, that is your responsibility, that you have to bring, and the person going on the fourth side really, really has a very, very important role to play. You have to advance your country, your side's perspective. So if you are, say, the opposition, you will advance your perspective, but your major role will be to, disassociate the audience and disassociate the adjudicators to the previous speaker they just heard for the past 7 minutes, right? So what the Prime Minister talked about. So if there was this person who was, very smart in their speech, and they understood that they have to bring the narrative back to the present, right? What does your side believe in? Your side is not talking about the present a lot. Your side's basic argument is set on the principles of the past, right? And how the principles of the past have led to fostering a very stable environment in the world at this point of time, right? And how, because certain countries did not follow and did not preach and did not practice the principle in the first place, which has led to, conflict in that area. So, if I am the Prime Minister of the opposition, I will not go and say that Syria is not in conflict, because that's not up for debate, right? It is in conflict. It's a territorial narrative which has been in conflict for the past so many years, right? There are government reports, there are UN reports, there are media reports which have established that it is a place of conflict. So don't talk about that. But you talk about the fact that how the lack of a democratic government has led to this situation. You can talk about as to how in the Europe, say countries like Netherlands, countries like Iceland, countries like Germany, or, if you go down, if you talk about Australia, you talk about New Zealand, how the beautiful narratives of democracy have led to their countries being strengthened at this point of time. How, because of democratic principles, they are being led by very effective leaders. How female leadership has enabled itself. How, women at this point of time are talking about, very important aspects which have, impacted them, and how they're defying stereotypes, they're bringing on patriarchy. Because at the end of the day, their thought process is being fostered in a very independent way, because leadership in women and girls are being encouraged, something which was not happening in a narrative which was set by a dictatorial regime at some point of time. So you talk about that. You talk about how enabling democracy in the first place has led to a very peaceful and a very, enabling environment. And how, because say a country like Syria or a country like Iraq, which did not have that, led to, absolute deconstruction of the political narrative in the country, which impacted the people on a day-to-day basis. And how the reason that these countries are in conflict today is because of the absence of democracy. So talk about that. Talk about how the prime minister of the government side has led all of us to believe that, in a world which is, featuring democracy, how the world is a dangerous place, and talk about that. Talk about the fact as to how the prime minister of the government side is trying to, blur and paint a tainted picture of democracy. So much so that, make the people imagine that, just imagine if we were in a country, if we were in a, spectrum where democracy didn't exist, right? We would not have somebody as talented as Angela Merkel being the chancellor of Germany, leading its people. Talk about how, when the pandemic hit, there were, female leadership backed countries, performed way more effectively. They were able to ward off the virus in a way more effective manner. Their populations, worked in a certain manner. The streamlining of economic resources and the streamlining of healthcare resources was more stringent, with more and more able leadership, right? So at the end of the day, talk about how democracy has not only fostered, female leadership, but has also fostered an open environment wherein government functions carry out in a more effective manner. And just ask the people to imagine if that didn't exist, and tell them, if that didn't exist, a situation like Syria would happen. And tell them that, and bring your audience to the perspective as to how the lack of a historically relevant narrative like democracy has led to a present situation in Syria, which is a nightmare to be in, right? So link the present to the past, because that is what the opposition has been trying to do. So if I am somebody in the opposition, I will take the audience and take my adjudicators back to the present and bring them again to the back to the past, sorry, and bring them again to the present, and tell them that, in the past, if democracy didn't exist, the present would look like this. So that is why democracy should exist. That irrespective of the fact that if Syria historically did not have a democratic narrative, democratic narratives must be established. Because at the end of the day, that is how, a country evolves from being in a conflicted situation to a post-conflict phase, to a developing phase, and goes on to be a developed nation, right? Talk about that. So again, very, very basic principles. You have to be very, very crystal clear as to what the topic and what the basic idea of your argument is. For the government, the argument idea is that you have to bring them back to the present and talk about how democracy has eradicated basic human rights facilities for the people living in the Middle East. And the opposition's basic aspect is to talk about the past and say that because of the absence of a democratic narrative in the country, the present seems like this, right? And this is what each side has to validate. The government has to validate their own perspective. The opposition has to validate their own perspective. Whichever side does it in a better way, whichever side establishes their point and also undermines the point of their opposing counsel, be it the government doing it for the opposition or the opposition doing it for the government, whichever side is able to do that in a more effective manner, that, I'm not going to say it goes on to win the debate, because winning or not winning, or, what happens when you're adjudicating, or how that goes into the picture, that again is very subjective. But at the end of the day, that's how you have a more enriching session. Because, for instance, I, as a debater, I never believe in whether I want to win something or I don't want to win something. There have been times when I've won a lot of awards wherein I felt that my performance could have been better. And, of course, you come back and you won a certain prize money and you're happy, and, you end up spending it and all of that. But at the end of the day, that money gets spent. Those certificates and those trophies, they go on in some corner of your house, and, they're lying in some, cupboard, or they're lying in some folder. But whatever you've, inculcated from those experiences, I think that is what you carry out in your corporate lives, or in your professional lives, or I think even in your personal lives. I think, communication is key in whichever perspective you're talking about. And I think that is something which is very, very important, and something you essentially learn and harness a lot when you're doing a debate. Coming down to the third person, Can you just give me one moment? I'm just getting a call from my office. Is it okay if I just take 1 minute off? If somebody can just say that it's all right?
Yes,
From
ma'am.
the, yeah. I'm so
Yes,
sorry.
ma'am, sure.
All right. Yes, I'm so sorry. There's just there are a couple of sport events happening in like 2 to 3 days, and there's a lot of fire on the promos. Yeah, I'm so sorry. So coming down to the third person who's like going now, understand a lot of times it's said that like going in last is personally a lot of people don't prefer it and then all of those things, but again, understand it's not an individual effort, right? And I have established it throughout my discussion with you all. So even if you're going and if you're the third speaker, you have a very, very important role, because I've interacted with so many people in PDs, in CDs, and we've talked about PDs a lot and all of those things. And they would either want to go first or they would either want to go second, right? They would not ideally want to go in third or be the whip and all of those things. Now understand, I completely differ with them. I do not agree with them, because I feel that even if you're going, even if you're the third person, you're concluding the entire narrative. So, even if somebody, say the first speaker, faltered at some points, or the second speaker faltered at some points, you can always make a comeback. And trust me, I have, in my so many years of debating for various mediums, that is something I've learned, that if you falter, that doesn't mean that you cannot make a comeback. There is no bad time to make a comeback in a debate, right? So there have been times when I've started and my start has not been great, but I picked up and I did really well in the mid of my debate or towards the end, or maybe I answered my question in such an effective way that, it kind of, summed up my whole debate in a very effective manner. So, do not lose heart if somebody in your team has faltered each way. And do not, get so bothered by it that it, displaces your stability of mind. Because debating, communication is nothing but stability of mind. If you are clear key, what do you have to say? If you're very, very clear that, this is a topic and this is the idea and this is what my construction of argument is going to be. And if you're very clear about it and you do not get dissuaded by, say, an opposition speaker, or, like a mishappening happening around you, or maybe you're giving a speech and somebody around you collapses, or no, all of those things happen. Wow. Or the mic just, stops working. All of those things happen. And it's a very commonplace phenomena to happen, right? You have to maintain the stability in your mind. So even if you're going like all out there and if you're like, ferociously moving your hands and all of those things, your stability and your clarity of thought has to be at the pristine level. And a lot of people will come in and a lot of people will tell you that, your debating prowess becomes better when you start speaking in a, more dignified would not be the right word, in a more fluent way. Or, you start using tougher words, or you start using, a vocabulary which is, not very commonplace. You're using, bigger words and all of those things. I feel that you can debate in the most basic language. That's not the problem. The problem is that sometimes you get caught up in the preparation of a lot. I, as a speaker, I've always believed in extemporaries, and I think that's why I really enjoy doing PDs also, because I'm able to make up arguments quickly. I'm able to prepare what I'm thinking and present that to you in a slightly effective manner. And I think that is something, as a speaker, I'm not saying that makes me somebody, I mean, that makes me stand out or something like that, because I would be too narcissistic to say that. It's just that I think for me, I think that is what my style has been over the years, to read more and more, to encapsulate more and more, and to remain calm, even in chaos. Because I think that is the most important thing as a parliamentary debater that you have to take care of, And I think that is why, what differentiates you from a conventional debater to a parliamentary debater. As a conventional debater, you know the topic already. You get 2 to 3 days of preparation. You know कि आपको जाके 5 minute के लिए बोलना है, so you can write your speech, you can learn your speech, and there's no problem with that. Absolutely not, because I started as a conventional debater, and I started learning my speeches and delivering them. And once I got better at that, I kind of understood that this is something I can do. I want to try and experiment with something else. And I started reading more and more, and I got to a narrative. And I think MUN's helped me here, that, because I was reading and I was debating on so many topics, it kind of made me understand how I can, within, say, 60 seconds, I can, go up on stage and give a 3 minutes ka speech, because all I had was, writing down some points and having this clarity of thought that A, B, C, 3 things, and this is what I want to talk about. So even if my entire construction of argument is on one point, right, talking about the present or bringing the past and reflecting the present, or anything, right, at the end of the day, my thought process should not get confusing. That's the most important point. So when I'm speaking, when I'm delivering my speech to the person listening to me, now that person can be somebody who's an adjudicator, that person can be somebody who's from the academic council of the college, that person can be somebody who's just listening, or that person can just be another competitor of mine at the end of the day, or that person can also be my own team member who's listening to me on the stage, right? They should be able to understand what I'm trying to tell them. I think that is the most basic thing. And I think once you conquer that as a speaker, I think you will be able to excel. And I think that's the key to doing a parliamentary debate, having that clarity of thought and expressing your information in the most basic language. It's not that you have to have this absolute, great, fluency of English, or you have to have this, bank of extremely tough words from the vocabulary. Of course, I mean, the more you work on a language and the more well-read you are, the more proficient you're in a language, that's a great thing. But, that is not something that you absolutely need to become a great debater, right? To communicate, you need basic language. To communicate, I think more than the vocabulary, what is important is clarity of thought. So if any of you feel that, you have come from a remote area wherein, your English is not great, don't let it bog you down. Read more and more, read the newspaper every day. Clarity of thought is way more important than having an immaculate vocabulary. And I can contest this with any person. I can contest this with somebody who's my professor. I can contest this with somebody who's, my colleague, because that's something that I've always believed in. So I think always, do not lose faith in you as a debater because of that, right? So if you're going in third at some point of time, conclude your arguments in a very, very effective manner. So say, for instance, the first speaker or the second speaker is faltered. So first do that kind of damage control, right? Bring the audience and the adjudicators and the people who your debate is meant to be, your target audience who are marking you, which are the adjudicators. Bring their attention back to you and back to your team. And most importantly, back to your argument, right? So if, say, the prime minister of the opposition has come on and has beautifully made people understand as to how, female leadership because of democracy has reached to a helm, and how, that has led to a very, stable narrative altogether. Make sure that you will defy those points. You will again, talk about the fact that irrespective of the narrative wherein female leadership at certain areas has, led to, Germany or New Zealand being, working in a very effective manner during a pandemic. But at the end of the day, also talk about how those very, countries have also time and again spoken against the atrocities that are being done by, say, a USA or by a UK, right? Talk, and use that point and, counter their own argument and bring and, highlight the, the efficacies of their argument itself. So if I am somebody who's gone on stage and I have the person who just went prior to me went on and talked about how, say, a specific person from a specific country has come on and has talked about the narrative as to how their country is doing very well under them. Be well read enough. And, all of this can only happen if you're well read. Go on and talk about how these female leaders have time and again talked about how, territorial invasion leads to destabilization. Talk about how, because of all of these countries invading with the territories of Syria, dehumanization of women have happened. So much so that women are also increasingly becoming insurgents and, like they're resorting to violent practices. There are a majority of reports back in the from 2017 to 2019, which have been issued by the UNSC and the DISEC, which have talked about how dehumanization of female capital is happening in Middle East, and how a lot of women are taking up arms because they have either been raped or they have been, assaulted, and they do not have a stable home anymore, and they've taken up arms against the aggressors, and how, a certain section of the population have been they've become insensitive, so much so that they've taken up arms. And this is all happening in the garb of democracy. So talk about that. Talk about how the female leaders that they've just mentioned, how those leaders itself have talked about what all these countries are doing in the narrative of democracy is absolutely unjustified. Because remember, if I am the government and I'm saying that democracy at this day and age is not ideal for the world order, I will go on and say how in the present day and age, what people are doing in the name of democracy is absolutely unjustified, right? So I will say that these democratic ideals, which have led to those women or those female leaders become that powerful, it is them in that position of power who have denounced what other countries are doing, right? So go on and talk about things like that. Be smart enough, right? Try to find in loopholes in the arguments of the opposing counsel. So if you're in the government, try to find loopholes with the opposition. And I think this is what, as the last speaker, that this gives you such a beautiful opportunity to do. Because as a last speaker, you don't have to introduce a new point. You just have to validate your point, right? So you have 7 minutes to validate your point, and you have those 7 minutes to, find the loopholes of the top two speakers or the first two speakers of the other team. So find the loopholes, for the matter of which you have to listen to them speaking a lot. So more than practicing what your speech is going to be, you have to listen to what those two people have just said. And then again, public speaking is not so much about speaking, it's more about listening, right? And write this line down, because public speaking is honestly not so much about speaking, but about listening. Because if you do not listen to what your opposition is saying, you will never be able to counter them. You will never be able to find loopholes. And if you're not able to do that, for you or your team to excel in a parliamentary debate, that's just, you're not going to do it in the most effective manner possible, right? So make sure that you do that. So as the opposition, as the third speaker in the government, you are going to validate your point, and you're going to basically highlight the loopholes in the first two speakers of the opposing counsel. Coming down to the last speaker, who will be from the opposition, what your narrative is going to be. Now, there have been 5 speakers before you. You are concluding the entire debate for the adjudicators. And it is post this that the marking will start. So you will be the last person that they will be listening to before they start marking, right? This is how that's how I perceive it. Because a lot of it, if you're only looking at in terms of, if you're in a debate and your idea is to go to the next round, how they will end up marking you is also very important, right? This is something you cannot honestly deny. So you are going to be the last voice they hear before they will start marking, right? Or before they will go into a discussion wherein they will decide which team did this and which team did that and all of those things. So maybe either by this point of time, their minds have already been made up. They feel this team has done better, right? So in case their minds have already been made up, you have the the stage for 7 minutes, which is a decent enough time to change what they've thought, right? Or if their minds are not made up, you have 7 minutes to make them make the final decision. So again, being the last speaker is, a lot of people will think it's not like a great place to be in. But for me, I feel that's the best place to be in, because you can either change the thought process of the adjudicators who was initially thinking of not going in with your team, or for somebody who had not made up their mind to, say, what, this team has done well, because this speaker really gives such a powerful, and such an impactful conclusion that they will just agree to what they've, said. So make sure that, your concluding remarks are very effective. You bring the audience back to what your agenda was. You will find the loopholes in all the 3 speakers of the government, because now everybody else has spoken, right? And at the end of the day, you will also go in and talk about what your perspective or what your side believes in, how that is essential and how that impacts the people living in those regions at this point of time. So for instance, if I'm the opposition and I'm the person who's making the concluding remarks, I will first of all highlight loopholes from speaker 1 of the government, speaker 2 of the government, speaker 3 of the government, which I will only be able to do if I've taken notes properly and I've taken stringent notes, right? Once I highlight the loopholes of all the 3 people who have come in from the government, I will go on and establish my case as to how the government has made a false, and their narrative has been full of loopholes. So you will go and talk about that, they've tried to present a case which has fault A, fault B, fault C, fault D, fault E, fault F. All you have to do is very smartly highlight the loopholes. That's it. You don't have to say, like this is absolutely irrelevant and all of that. Don't waste time on that. Just, just with a show of hands, show ki, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of these, and all of them are loopholes. So if this is a narrative that you believe in, sure, you can, but it's going to be a faulty one. And you're going to it's going to be a bad decision. So do not end up just saying to the adjudicators, if you make them win, you're not smart enough. Don't do that. Be smart. Don't, don't say that out loud, but, just try and, highlight the loopholes in such an effective manner that the person listening to you will end up being like, what? Yeah, what the last person said actually made sense, that there were these loopholes. And this is the last speech that they will hear. So leave them with that. Ask very important questions to them. Ask, you've talked about the fact that, today democracy has become a destabilizing agent. But if not democracy, then what? What is the alternative that you are highlighting? And for somebody who goes in at the last, if the opposition leader of, if like the leader of opposition, which goes in the second, right, will go and ask, then the final person in the government side will give you an answer. Don't do that. All the major questions, for instance, if you have to ask them, if not democracy, then what are you asking? Or what alternative mode of governance are you talking about? Make sure that the last person from your side will be asking these questions, because then they do not have answers, because again, you are the last speaker. Nobody will go after them. So the government side is always at a disadvantage, right? In that perspective. So whatever the third speaker in the government side asks, the third speaker in the opposition has an answer to that, or has the opportunity to answer. But if the third speaker in the opposition asks extremely relevant questions, the people in the government do not have a chance to answer that, right? So remember, if you're in the opposition, make full use of that. Also remember, at the same time, if you're a government and if you're in a team which is in the government, make sure that this can be a drawback. So make sure that you will give in an alternative. If you're saying that, democracy doesn't work, you will give an alternative. So the first speaker who will go in for you will give a brief of the alternative. Your second speaker will talk about it in a greater detail. And the third speaker will elucidate that in a more stringent manner, right? So I hope that, you've understood as to what the roles of each of the speakers are, how you have to frame your arguments in a certain way, what are the drawbacks of being in each of the capacities, and what are the important and what are the great, advantages of being in each of the roles. So if you have any questions, you can ask. If you want to take like 2 minutes to yourself and figure out and, like just encapsulate your thoughts, that's also great. I hope I've given you a detailed analysis of what a parliamentary debate is. And most importantly, my whole narrative whenever I'm training is always like to work on the attitudes of debaters, because I think if you're a debater who walks into a debate with the right form of attitude, I think that has a great, impact on your delivery style. Because as a debater, you will not just be restricted to only doing parliamentary debates. You will also do other debates. You will do, and as law students, you will do moot courts. You will do paper presentations. So each of the formats has a different modus operandi, and each of the formats require a different scope of, understanding and a different way of talking. So more or less, for instance, if I am doing a CD to a PD, my debating style is the same because I talk in the same manner, right? But at the same time, my attitude to approaching something is extremely different. So I hope I've been able to, make you understand what the attitude of a parliamentary debater is. Again, I'm saying that's a very subjective thing. That's been the encapsulation of what my experience as a debater has been over the years. So I hope I've been able to give you quite an insight on that. If there are any questions, you can all, if somebody from the society can tell me how are we planning to taking questions. Are we taking verbal questions or are we typing down questions? If one of you could tell me that, then we could take on the questions. And I would advise you to ask me something as to how you handle points of information, because I think that's something I've not talked about, and that's something I always talk about. So points of information, please ask. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. It really helped. But I do have some questions. Firstly, I will be asking some questions. Then I will be opening the floor for participants. They can ask a question by writing it in chat box or can raise their hands. Ma'am, my first question to you is that as you gave the example of the topic of democracy, so we have realized that in parliamentary debate, the topics are multidimensional. So how we are supposed to cope up with the same or keep ourselves updated from being a specific academic field?
Yeah, yeah, I know. That's okay. What I'm saying is, can you just repeat the last part of your question, because there was some overlapping and
Yeah, sorry for disturbance.
So that's okay. That's chill. No problem. Yeah. Go ahead.
My question, I'm repeating my question. My question was that as you take the example of democracy as a topic, so, ma'am, in parliamentary debates, what happens is that topics are multidimensional. So, how we are supposed to keep ourselves updated from these topics, from being a specific academic field,
See, first of all, just read a lot. I mean, honestly, I have been talking about these things with kids. I've been talking. I was taking a session with Lamatnia girls. That was earlier in the year itself, and I told them that there is no substitution to reading, because I haven't been able to find one. So if any of you found one and you can tell me a quicker way to be updated, that would be great. But at the end of the day, it is for you to be to be more updated. You have to read on a daily basis. So give out reading the newspaper is a very, very easy way to go about doing that. Even if you in a situation where you cannot where you do not have a paper per se, you can always look up on websites and just take recourse to situations. Also, at the end of the day, there are certain topics. If you're all law students, right, I'm sure you understand the whole narratives of polity, of how democracy impacts is a socio-cultural narrative. It's not just a constitutional perspective, right? Of course, you know about the constitution in greater depths than me because you've been studying all of that. But at the end of the day, a democratic setup, and why do I say it's socio-cultural, is because it affects your day-to-day habits. For instance, if it affects your day-to-day habits, it affects your day-to-day consumption, it affects what kind of literature you're reading, it affects what kind of films are being made in the surroundings around you, right? So at the end of the day, because it's a social cultural narrative, it is a multidimensional topic. And I think that is the reason why I chose democracy also, because you can talk about women rights, you can talk about child rights, you can talk about human rights, you can talk about LGBTQ rights, you can talk about governance structures, you can talk about the constitution when you're talking about a democratic setup, because governance affects each and every person in myriad ways. So how do you keep up academically? First of all is reading. I mean, honestly, I have never been able to find a substitute to it. If you're not so much into reading, you can watch content. There are so many interesting YouTube channels like the Vox, which will, give you an update about what's happening, say, in Syria, or what's happening in Iraq, or what the Ukraine crisis is about. So, do not trust and believe whatever source you find on the internet. That is one benchmark which you have to, understand very clearly. But then again, there are certain creators and there are certain people who are making really good content. So you can watch a documentary wherein, they've been talked about, wherein the actual scenarios have been talked about, and you can take note of that. Also, like at some point of time, you will realize what appeals to you more. So for me, I think, reading about conflicts since I was a certain years old, I think that's been very interesting to me. So naturally, I have, watched a lot of conflict-based documentaries, or I've read a lot of, books which talk about conflict, or, how militaries affect so many other narratives, how, a certain specific political narrative in your country also affects your thought process on a very micro level. So these are certain things that, appeal to me as an individual. So I read about them a lot more because, it's my area of interest. So understand what is your area of interest as a human being and read more and more about that. So you can always divert that debate to what you want to talk about. So if I'm a filmmaker and I am in a place where I realize that, the other teams are all of lawyers, and maybe I cannot stand in a legal argument with them because, they've been studying that for 5 years. And if I'm talking about democracy, I will talk about freedom of thought and the liberation to create and to speak my mind, and how that, affects filmmaking or affects literature, because that is something that I have been reading for the past 3 years. And that is my strong point. So if you are smart enough, and once you gain more confidence, you will be able to divert the logic towards something that you know better. But again, you have to know something in depth. And for that, you have to put in the time, you have to put in the hard work, and you have to read and watch and consume, important content. I think that's very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, my next question to you is that what is the evaluation criteria in parliamentary debates? Like how much emphasis is given on verbal aspects and how much emphasis is given on arguments aspects?
Okay, so again, it's a very, very subjective notion, because whenever you have adjudicators, like specifically if you're in a physical space wherein you're meeting everybody and all of that, you can still be talking to them and you can have an idea as to what is the, scope of the marking process and all of those things. But again, that ends up being very subjective. And, if you're doing an online debate, I'm sure all of you who've done any form of online debate, you will get to understand that they will not be they will not be willing to be very transparent about the the marking perspective, or they will, give you a very basic umbrella narrative and the essentialities will not be talked about. However, when you're a debater, when you're in a debate, it's always smart to ask them what is the, allocation of marks. So if they end up telling you that, this is, they're giving major emphasis to arguments, or they're giving major emphasis to how your arguments are being catered to, right? Draft your speech in a way like that. Something what I believe in as a debater, just make sure, and I think, even if you ask the judging criteria, and if you're given a very haphazard answer, which you cannot which is something which is very commonplace and happens a lot of the times, make sure that your speech is balanced enough. Make sure that your arguments are right in the place. Make sure that you're expressing your argument in a very clear, concise, and a very, very simple manner for each and everybody to understand. And make sure that you're highlighting the loopholes of the counter argument that is being raised by the opposing team. If your speech in itself is balanced, so irrespective of the fact whether they're giving more, if they're giving more weightage to the manner in which you're speaking, or whether they're giving more weightage to the top or to the points that you have, make sure that your speech on your end is balanced enough. Because a balanced speech, again, for an adjudicator, even if I'm told that, I have to give 10 marks for clarity of thought, and say a 15 mark is for content, right? At the end of the day, again, for every adjudicator, because they're human beings at the end of the day, everybody marks in a subjective manner. So as a debater, make sure that your speech is balanced enough, and your way and your articulation of thought and your clarity of thought reflects when you're speaking. I think if you're able to do that, then you don't have to worry about marking kaisi hai or marking bata rahe ya nahi bata rahe, because if you're prepared enough, it's all right. You can like take, you can look in the eye of the storm and you can battle it out accordingly. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am, it answers.
Yeah.
Next question is that how conventional debate is different from parliamentary debate?
Okay, so I think I've talked about that even when I was, giving the whole narrative and I was explaining it to you. A conventional debate is somewhere where you would know the topic beforehand, and you will have the opportunity to prepare in advance, and like maybe remember your speech, and just like go and say the topics, or like go and prepare your pre-rehearsed speech. You can go on the stage and you can deliver that in a very effective manner, and then take up the questions that have been asked to you and answer that. So the only thing that you do not know are the points of information that you will be asked post your speech. However, in a parliamentary debate, you have to rely entirely on the narrative of the fact that how well prepared are you in general, how much are you aware of what's happening around, how you can quickly listen to a topic, or how you can quickly listen to a logic and find a counter topic to find a counter reaction to that, how you can cover up for a fallacy that your co-team member has done, and cover up and do the damage control, how you can find a loophole in a very well packed speech of another speaker, or how you cannot get completely dissuaded by the flamboyance of a previous speaker's speech. So I think parliamentary debates is something which it's that's what I'm saying. It's an attitude at the end of the day. You do not know what you're walking into. You just have to be well prepared. It's like you go to play sports, right? And you don't know what the challenge is going to be. But because your preparation has been stringent enough, you've been practicing, you've been working out, you've been practicing with your team. There is an understanding in the team. So, even if you're in the midst of a very challenging and a complicated situation, because of the camaraderie that your team members have, because of the belief that you have in your team and in yourself, and how you're able to behave in a complicated and a chaotic environment, if you're able to have that stability of thought, if you're able to clearly think and articulate your thought, I think you're prepared enough. So I think that is the difference between a conventional debate and a parliamentary debate. You don't know what you're walking into. You don't know what the topic is going to be. You might really believe in something and you have to go on stage and, you have to completely, for the next 7 minutes, defy that, right? So, you have to be prepared and you have to be willing enough to think in the opposing ways, as well. And you do not have a lot of time. You get maximum half an hour of 25 minutes, 30 minutes of time to prepare, and a 7-minute speech, right? So at the end of the day, you also need to have confidence in yourself to be able to, take your team forward, at least from your own perspectives. So it's a combined effort, and it's something that it's an effort that you put on a daily basis. So if you do that amount of hard work on a daily basis, I think that is what makes you a good parliamentary debater. It's not by chance that you become a really good parliamentary debater. It's a work in progress. Nobody, see, and I hope all of you will agree with me, we're not born debaters, we become debaters. And that is with constant practice. And whosoever, there might be people, I'm not contesting that, who would say that, they were born with that talent, and it's great. But I feel for myself that as a child, I stuttered as a kid, right? And today I can talk to people, or I can, communicate my thoughts for hours on end, right? And I think that is something that you work towards at the end of the day. So that, as I said, as a sports person, when you work out every day, you endure every day, you work out with your team every day, you practice with your team every day, that's an effort that you do on a combined basis. So, I think parliamentary debates is a combined basis. You become a parliamentary debater. You're a work in progress, which takes amount of time. So I think, that is the basic difference between a conventional debate and a parliamentary.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering my questions. Now I would like to open the floor for participants to ask their questions by raising their hands, or can type it in the chat box. Ma'am will address it. Aziza Rehman
Yeah,
have
there's
raised
no
her
admit. I'm
hand.
so sorry. That happens with me in all my team meetings sometimes. If you're typing a question and if any of you has any,
Aziza, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, ma'am. I have this doubt that should we construct our definition in a neutral way, or should it be constructed in a way which favors our stance on the motion?
absolutely. So again, I think it's a very, very important point that you've asked me. Your stance, absolutely. See, you're here to prove your point at the end of the day, right? So even if, as I said, I'm somebody who believes in democratic ideals, right? But I have debated on topics which have gone on to say that freedom of speech and expression is a bane to society, and I've defended that, right? And it's something I completely do not believe in, because like the one thing that I do the most is talk, like as an individual itself. But when you're on the stage, when when you are like defending a topic, you have to, whatever you do on stage or whatever choices you make, is to establish your point, is to take further your belief, your strategy. So you have to make the people understand that why your definition or why your strategy or why your logic is the smartest thing, or why is it better, or and why is it better than what your opposing counsel is establishing. So but again, do not get so much swayed by that you pick up a definition which is very weak in its structure. So make sure it's a pretty balanced definition, but the core of the definition favors your side. That is something that you have to stick to. I hope you understood what I'm trying to say, right? Any other
Anyone else would like to ask?
I have a question, ma'am. Can I ask?
Yeah, definitely, please do.
Like, ma'am, you talked about, ma'am, speaking style, ma'am. So I have a doubt that if I am speaking aggressively but with a calm mind, does that help?
Absolutely. See, that's what I'm saying, that you can be an aggressive speaker, you can be somebody who's very composed, right? So I mean, it just depends. Like for me, if I talk about my style is a mix of both. At some points of time I will be very, very calm. At some points of time I'm going to be like a little slightly towards the more aggressive side. But whatever is happening, whatever your exterior is, your mind should be calm. Because if that's not, if your mind is in a jumble of what your next topic is going to be, or what your next point is going to be, if that is in a turmoil, then it will reflect in your speech, it will reflect in the next point you're going to make. So your speaking style is your style, own your style, right? Of course, if there are your seniors who will come and tell you that you can improve on your style, listen to them, listen to counsel, listen to the good advice that you're getting, and make your style better. But again, at the end of the day, if you're somebody who speaks on a slightly aggressive note, do not go completely calm, because then you're going to lose your personality. Don't let your personality get lost while public speaking, because it is you out there on the stage at the end of the day, right? But choose to better it, listen to counsel which makes it better. But at the same time, even if you're being slightly aggressive on the stage, it's all right. The people can hear what you're saying. You're not so loud that they're unable to understand what you're trying to say, right? There have been times when people have been extremely loud on the mic. So like if I mean, just be smart enough with that. If you know that you are a slightly aggressive speaker, keep the mic to a distance, right? If you know you're a soft speaker, make sure that you're standing a little nearer to the mic, so that people can at the end of the day hear you properly, right? These are very, very basic things, but just make sure that your mind is very calm, because that is where your arguments are, right? You've not learned them from before, you've not written them on a piece of paper, and you're not reading out from them. The max that you have are some pointers. So if you have 7 points, you have just 7 pointers, or 7 words, right? Those are not well articulated points. The articulation lies here. So this has to be very, very calm. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
No problem.
Anyone else?
Ma'am, I have another doubt.
Yeah.
Like, could you just elaborate upon what is point of information, how to raise point of information during the opposition speech? Like, we have this system, right?
Yeah, so points of information is essentially when a question is asked to the speaker who's just spoken. And so when, for instance, if I'm a speaker and I'm, say, the first speaker, right? and I go on to the stage, right? And I've given my speech. Now my speech is complete. So before I go back to my seat, or before I unmute myself, or all of those shenanigans that are happening, the people who are moderating the debate will ask points of information. Now, point of information is basically any person. So if I'm the government side, the people in the opposition can raise their hands or whatever, however the questions are being asked, if it's typing or, you get the gist of it, right? So they will ask a question with regard to what my speech has been. And whatever points have I just talked about, that they will ask me a question pertaining to that. Now, my response is going to validate whether I have been able to justify what I have talked about in the past 7 minutes, or whether I have not been able to do that. So when you've been asked a point of information, for instance, if I have been saying that, this is happening in XYZ country, and if I'm asked a question with regard to that, I must be able to answer that in a very effective manner. So point of information basically is when a question is asked to the speaker with regard to the speech that they have made, or if I'm going third and I'm concluding, and my team has been talking about how democracy in itself essentially initially was a good aspect, but today it has lost its way. And if somebody asks me a question, I should be able to answer in a way which validates my arguments, which validates the 7 minutes of talking points that I have prophesized about, right? In the same way, if I'm in the opposition and I'm being asked a question, I should be able to validate and give logic and, put a certain sense to the narrative that I've been talking about. If I'm unable to do that, then I've not answered my question effectively. So answering a question asked to you is basically what a point of information entails, and effectively answering a question becomes extremely important. In the same way, if you're in the opposition and I'm somebody who's on side government, you should ask me a question which is extremely valid. A lot of times people end up asking really frivolous questions. So when you ask a frivolous question, you're basically giving a certain amount of time for the speaker to talk about their point again. So make sure that you listen to each and every speaker very, very effectively, very, very patiently, and you ask really important questions, which can, either break their argument or at least cast some shadow of doubt on the argument. So asking important, relevant questions is again very, very important.
Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable insights and for your invaluable time. Now I would like to call our co-convener, Mr. Sudeep Krishna, to extend vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a great, great experience.
Thank you so much, Prachi. Good evening, everyone. Abraham Lincoln once said, and I quote, that debate, dissent, and discussion are the three important pillars of democracy. Seeking inspiration from these lines and understanding the relevance of the importance of students to speak on matters of national and international importance through the means of parliamentary debate, it gives me utmost pleasure to announce that Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia has another feather in its cap, as we have a very successful session on art of parliamentary debates. Thank you so much, Karishma ma'am, for your invaluable time. I totally understand that you might have a very busy schedule, but you still were very kind enough to give a huge chunk of time. So I'm really grateful. And I would also like to share that I also can recall the golden days where I used to debate along with you. And we used to make a parliamentary debating team. And you had been the guardian of our team. So it was a great honor and privilege to be a part and learn a lot from you. With that being said, I'd like to I'd like to begin with a vote of thanks, and I would like to thanks our Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar, to allow a culture of debate in the university. I would like to thank our Dean, Faculty of Law, Mr. Dr. Iqbal Hussain and Dr. Professor Fazanul Rahman, who have mentored the culture of debate and discussion in the Faculty of Law. Moreover, I would like to thank the teaching and non-teaching staff of Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia. I would like to thank the convener of the Debating Society, Mr. Ragim Noshad, who has been a very great leader and has allowed us to have creative ideas for the betterment of the debating culture in the university. With that being said, I would like to thank the event head, Shevya Singh, moderator, Prachi Tripathi, tech head, Zubair Ahmed, Zoya Shabir, Sadia Rafiq, and other members of the Debating Society who have been an active part of this particular event. And last but not the least, I would like to thank the Zoom meeting virtual platform, which has allowed us to have a good connection at the times of pandemic. With that being said, I would like to take a leave from all of you, and I would like to promise that we are yet to come with a lot more events in time to come. So please be with us and keep on participating in the events. Thank you so much. It was a great event. I hereby request all the participants to please fill the Google form that we have attested to the means of comment box. We would be providing the certificate of participation in this meeting only to those participants who will fill the form. So we expect a good response in the Google Forms. Thank you so much, Karishma ma'am.